All right, today we'll talk a little bit about Islamic civilization, but I have been lobbied for a story. There's a lot of stories, I could tell. What was you asked? What was the most
Like the most frightening.
frightening thing?
Like, oh my God, I might die.
Yeah, well, there's been more than one. There's a time when I fell off the wall. There was a time with a switchblade, a guy with a switchblade and a log chain. Both of those I thought maybe could be it.
I want to hear about this vlog.
The time you almost ran into another car when we were driving back from St. Augustine.
St. Augustine, well, you know, that's not the Middle East.
It was still, oh my God, we're gonna die. That's still,
I didn't ever thought that, but
I did.
yeah, well, people get nervous. Okay, I'll tell you the story about the log chain and the switchblade. Or maybe it's the switchblade and then the log chain. I was digging in Jordan, as I've done many times, and this was a long time ago now. I don't even know how long ago, many years ago. And one of the things we do on our excavation, kind of like we do now and what I'm going to this summer in Israel, is we would take trips on our day off to other places to see things. And so we decided we were going to go see a castle, Crusader era castle, but it was an Islamic castle actually. It was built by Muslims. And so we went to this, it's called Ajloun is the name of the city, Ajloun. And so up on a hill outside of the town, up on a hill that looks down into the Jordan Valley, there is a large castle. Surrounding the castle is a moat. And so there's only one road up there. And then when you get up there, there's a little parking area. And you walk across the moat, which has a little bridge over it. And you go up and you wind your way up into the castle. So we were going up there. And we had a small vehicle, kind of like a van, but I don't know if you've ever been to different parts of the world where they have little bitty buses, but that's what this was. It was sort of like a van, it was a bus. So it had a door on the side, kind of like a bus, but it was really van-sized. And so we would get the guy to be our driver, who was the guy who drove us out in the morning, and ask him if he would take us. We'd pack a little lunch with us, you know, some watermelon, some cheese, some stuff like that, and we would head out and go visit places. So we got there and we ate lunch. We visited another place, and we got there and we ate lunch, and we said, hey, let's go into the castle. So we go walking up into the castle, and it's pretty steep, and you wind all the way around these dark rooms off to the side, and then finally get all the way up to the top, and you get this commanding view, beautiful view out over the valley and so forth. So we had, like I said, maybe 15 of us, something like that. Some of them were females and some were males. A couple of the females went off into a side room. Nobody really noticed, but they went off into a side room because there are arrow slits and stuff like that. It was kind of neat. And somehow they got a little separated from everybody else. So we were at the last ramp up to the top, and so most of us went up to the top, and we're looking around, and then we start to hear screams. A lot of screaming, and sounded like females screaming. And so we looked around, we realized that a couple of our group was not with us, and they were female, and so we went running down the ramp to get there. As we were running down the ramp, there was a guy coming up the other way, very nonchalant. Just kind of walking like nothing's happening. You know, you got women screaming, you got like a dozen people running down a ramp, and he's just walking up like, hey, nothing's going on. And so we got there, and the women tell us that 3 men were in that room, or came into that room, and had grabbed them. We'll just leave it at that. They had assaulted them, I guess we would say today. And And so I said, was one of them wearing a blue jean jacket? And they said, yes. And so another guy and I went up and got the guy. Because he was the only guy up there at the top now. And so we grabbed him and we're bringing him down. And when we got down to where they were, they said, yeah, that's the guy. That's like the worst guy, right? That's like the main guy or whatever. And so we decided we're going to take him down and out of the castle. And we knew down there were some soldiers and, anyway, we had apprehended the perpetrator, right? So it was this other guy and I. And he actually was a big guy, bigger than me, or as big as me. And
The other guy or the jean jacket?
the other guy, no, the jean jacket guy was not a big guy. He was a Jordanian guy. He's not a big guy. We don't have too many big guys. Well, some. So anyway, we're walking him down, and we're walking him down. He doesn't know much English. We know some Arabic, but he's basically saying that he is in the police. I said, you're in the police? I said, we're going to take you to the police. And anyway, so we got him down there. And the other people follow us behind. And we had that little bus out there. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe we can get this guy into the bus. And, because I didn't see any soldiers down there, get him on the bus. Maybe we can get some soldiers come over, get some police there to figure out what's going on. And as we are approaching the bus, this guy comes over and starts to yell at us, this other Arab guy. Starts to yell at us. And so we're in this parking lot, and he's yelling at us. And then he reaches down out of his boot, and he opens up a switchblade. And he starts swinging it around. So that got my attention. And then I realized pretty quickly that the other guy had left, and it was just me with the guy in a blue jean jacket and then the guy with a switchblade. And then the little bus was behind us. And so I'm thinking in my mind, what am I going to do? And I remembered we'd eaten that watermelon for lunch. So you thought all those details didn't matter, but that was going through my mind, and we had a butcher knife. We had a big knife to cut the watermelon. So I'm thinking, so I got no weapon, I got nothing. So I'm thinking if I can get in that bus, maybe keep this guy out, at least I could grab that knife and try to defend myself. So right when I'm thinking that, I see someone go running by. It's our bus driver. So I'm thinking, okay, great. The bus driver's going to get in the bus. He's going to kind of maneuver it between me and the guy with the switchblade. I can get on the bus, and we can. And he hops in the bus, and he drives away. He drives down the only road, all the way down. So now I'm thinking, okay, this is good. And then all these other people from the group are behind me, and they're all yelling at me to let the guy go. But I'm thinking, I let this guy go. The only thing between me and the switchblade is this guy. If I let go of him, I got nothing. And so I held him for a while, and then I yelled back to them to pick up rocks. Plenty of rocks around. I figured I got 15 people throwing rocks at this guy. Somebody's going to hit him. They were pretty good sized rocks around, like the size of baseballs. 15 people throwing baseball-sized rocks at a guy. I mean, this is why you read in the Bible they would stone people to death, right? That's how they did it. Didn't have to plan it ahead of time. Didn't have to be premeditated. There's rocks everywhere. I just remember when I was a kid, I used to think about that. Well, they must have had to haul the rocks with them, right? No. Plenty of rocks all around. So that's what I told them to do. I think some of them did pick it up. And then out of my peripheral vision, here comes a soldier. So I thought, okay, this soldier, he's got a weapon or whatever. They'll listen to him. So he comes running up there, and the guy with the switchblade turns the switchblade towards the soldier, and then I notice the soldier has no weapon. He's got no gun. And he's trying to talk to this guy. So that's when I decide, okay, I let go of the guy and I start backing up. As soon as I let go of the guy, he goes running over to a big flatbed truck and he pulls out a log chain. And he comes walking back towards me and he's swinging this log chain over his head. Like that. So I got a guy with a switchblade and a guy with a log chain and a soldier without a weapon who's trying to talk these guys down. Right? Or, I don't know, they were yelling a lot in Arabic very quickly. So I kind of back up, tell everybody to pick up rocks. And the soldier had distracted these guys that I could kind of back up. So I picked up some rocks myself. Now these guys come after us. Got to do something. So a lot of yelling going on, and so I told everybody, let's just start walking down the road, because we had no bus, we had nowhere to go. There's only one way up there. Way up on a hill, there's only one road, so we just started kind of walking like this, watching them going down the road. And we finally got down the road a ways. They were still up there arguing, and then I see our bus come up. So I haven't been thinking good thoughts about this bus driver. But here he comes. So everybody, of course, is happy to see him. And we all start getting on the bus. And right behind him are about 5 police cars. He had driven down into town to the police station, told them what was going on, and these guys had loaded up 4 or 5 little police cars, or like 5 or 6 guys per car. And they brought, I mean, there must have been 20, at least 20, 15, 20 police coming up there. And so by the time that we start back up, the police cars pass us. Then I see one of the cars stop, and I see these guys getting out, and they have rifles with scopes on them. You know, like a hunting rifle. Wow, okay, it's getting pretty serious. And then we go driving by, and one of the guys, see, they said there were 3 guys. One of the guys, and this was the guy that had the log chain, somehow, by the time as we're heading back up, he had wanted to take off, and the cops had I don't know what they did, we didn't see what they did to him, but by the time we got there, he's laying face down, out cold, on the pavement. And these women are screaming out of the bus. That's what, you know, and this cop is, I still never forget it, the cop's standing there and he's kind of smiling, you know, and these girls, that's the one, that's the one. And he picked up the guy by the hair because he was face down, and he held the head up, and these women go, he's the one, he's the one. I mean, it was pretty primal. And then the guy just went like this. Let go of his hair. Head hits the road again, and these women cheered. Ah! And so we keep heading up, and we get up a little further, and we could see 2 other guys, because it's way up high, and it's terraced. And you could see these guys running. 2 guys just running, I mean, as fast as they could run. And what would happen is they'd come to a terrace, and the terrace was maybe 4 feet high, I don't know, something like that. 4 or 5 feet high, and then they would just jump. Boom, they'd roll. They'd get up, start running again, jump, roll. And meanwhile, you know, the cops are along the side with scopes and stuff. And, you know, we got up there, all those guys were gone. And those 2 guys ran off, and they had the one guy. And then we went down to the police station. And they wanted the women to identify the guys, you know, tell what happened and all that, the one guy. And they gave their statement. And one of the guys, actually a couple of guys on the excavation, persuaded the women that these guys were going to get punished enough. And we were getting ready to leave in about a week or so. And we wouldn't be around. It'd take a long time for a trial and so forth. So they shouldn't even press charges. So they didn't. I thought, wow. So we get back in the bus and we head back to our place where we're staying. This was an old schoolhouse. It's like really one-story concrete building as we sleep on the floor. And that was on a Sunday afternoon. On Monday afternoon, there's a military jeep coming into our camp. It's got like 3-4 guys in there. One of them is a general and a driver and then like an assistant, or two. And he gets out and he wants to talk to these women. And he says, basically, you are going to testify. Well, we're going to be leaving. Well, the trial is Wednesday. We want you there. We want you to testify. And so the women said yes, which I think they were kind of predisposed anyway to want these guys to get it. But, everybody talked them out of it. And so they went. And on Wednesday, they went. In the meantime, by the way, those 2 guys were rolling down the hill. They had persuaded the guy who was on the pavement to tell them. And they knew what village. These guys all knew each other. In fact, one was related to the other one. So they went and picked those guys up by Sunday night. So this happened Sunday afternoon. By Sunday night, they had all 3 guys. By Wednesday, there was a trial. The women testified. They couldn't identify the guy with a switchblade. I could have identified him. Trust me. But the guy with the log chain, they could identify. And from what I understand, he got something like 15 years in prison. The other guy got 10 years in prison, and the third guy got 5 years in prison. He was the youngest one. And of course, they got real prisons there, as opposed to what we have here. I mean, they are prisons. Make big rocks into little rocks and stuff like that. None of this watching Oprah or Dancing with the Stars and eating pizza. These guys were, in prison. So anyway, because here's the thing. Sure enough, 2 of those guys were in the military. I think as I told you, maybe I told you, every male in Jordan and in most of these Arab countries, every male has to serve in the military. It's required. In Israel, all males and females have to serve in the military. But in Arab countries, all males have to serve in the military. And if you go to college, you serve less years. If you don't go to college, you serve 4 years. You do go to college, you serve 2 years. That's how it works. And these guys are both in the military. So the third guy was younger and was not yet in the military. So they had not only were on leave from military, they were on something. I don't know what they were taken, which was also against the law. So they did this while they were actually in the army or whatever they were in. They did this because they were high on something. They did this with deadly weapons. They touched women. All these things are illegal. They turned the weapons not only on Americans, but on another soldier. You see. And we were there as part of an archaeology thing. So technically, we were there at the invitation of the government. So we weren't just, American tourists running around. We were actually there working for the Department of Antiquities, which is a part of the Ministry of Tourism, which is a part of the government of Jordan. So they attacked women who were guests of the government. They were high, they were in the military, and they actually used weapons, and they turned those weapons not only on us, but on another soldier, So there you go. That's a story. You wanted a story where I thought maybe it may not end well for me. That day I thought may not end well for me. It did end okay for me. You know, I mean, it wasn't a nice experience, but I didn't get stabbed, and I didn't get beat up with a log chain. So I kind of counted it as a win at the end of the day. Okay, that's one story. That was just one afternoon out of the 20 times I've been to the Middle East. I figured out one time I've spent probably not quite 2 years. I spent more than a year and a half in the Middle East. Combined, yeah, if you combine it. Because I used to stay sometimes 10 weeks in the summers, 8, 10 weeks. You know, now I'm spending more like 5 weeks.
How hot is it there this summer?
Very hot. It's Florida hot.
Except worse, right?
What's that?
Except worse, right?
Well, it's, you know, Florida, I think, is worse than I'd rather be in. Because there's less humidity most of the time. There's less humidity. Here, it's like, you know, every day it's like 95% humidity and 95 degrees for about, you know, 3 months. And so there, it may be 95 to 100 degrees, but the humidity is down like 20, 30%. Depends on where you are. Some places have more humidity, like around the Sea of Galilee. Got some humidity. It's a big fishbowl-like thing, and humidity gathers there. But, you know, overall, a little more pleasant. And the more you're out in the desert, the easier it is. When I was digging out in the desert, I mean, the sun is intense, but you get a breeze that actually cools you off. Here in Florida, the only way I get cooled off is jump in a pool or go into air conditioning. That's about it. Well, I hope everyone's doing well. Now that our story time is over, which took up probably too much time, but it gives you a sense of the Middle East, right? A little bit of the culture. You know, because in the Middle East, as you've been reading, your connections make all the difference, right? Especially family connections. And if you're not a family, if you're a guest, if you are a guest of someone, that brings you protection. That's something that's respected. So, you know, if I go into a village and the sheikh or somebody has invited me to come meet with him, and somebody threatens me or somebody says something in that time period, that's a serious thing that the sheikh is going to deal with. Because I was there because he asked me there. I was his guest. And guests, visitors, are respected and taken care of. So the fact that we were there at the government's request did make a big difference. And in fact, I can tell you, when we got back to our camp and some of the local people found out what happened, they said, we're going to go over there and get them ourselves. That's exactly what they said. There's more to the story that I won't tell.
Thrilling adventure.
Yeah, there's more to that story, but that's enough because this is all being recorded. All right, so let's take a look at Islamic civilization. By the way, you got a couple of videos for this week. They're about 35 minutes each with some questions, so that'll catch us up on that. When we think about Islamic civilization, and here's a good question for us, is it Islamic civilization or is it Arabic civilization?
Mostly Arab.
Well, you know, it is. I mean, in the beginning, it is mostly Arab. But as Islam spreads, remember we said after the death of Muhammad, and we see rapid expansion into what today would be what we call the Holy Land, right? Israel, Jordan, Syria, Egypt. And then beyond that, into Iraq and Iran and North Africa and so forth. Within 100 years, it will take, if you're traveling, if you're just a traveler, you don't have jets, right? You don't have automobiles, you know, to go from one side of the empire, if we want to call it that, to the other, you'd have to be traveling pretty hard to get there in 2 years from one side to the other. I mean, it's a lot, it's a long, long ways. Now, that also brings in all different kinds of people. It brings together Arabs, Persians, Turks. Those are just three of the big ones. Three very different ethnic, I guess we'd say, ethnic groups, as well as different religions. Obviously Muslims, but also Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, just to name some. The largest ones, I suppose. These were, all of these different groups and different peoples and different languages were very active in this society, which I'm going to call Islamic society, because it's more than Arab society, certainly at that point. More than Arabic's being spoken, more than Arab people are involved, more than Islam is the religion. Now, of course, Arabic is key, and it plays a key role, as do the Arab people. This is in part why I think Arabic was so stressed as being the important language, in part because of its religious connection, right? I mean, the Quran's written in Arabic. And so sometimes I'll have people in the Middle East who have asked me, have you read the Quran? And I say, well, I've read some of the Quran. And they'll say, did you read it in Arabic? And I'll say, no. And they'll say, then you haven't read the Quran. In their minds, if you don't read the Quran in Arabic, you haven't really read the Quran.
Is it because like some of it's lost in translation, or?
Yeah. I mean, certainly any translation is an interpretation, but I think it goes more than that. It goes more than just losing something in translation. To them, God spoke Arabic to Muhammad, and Muhammad recorded it or recited it in Arabic. And so if you really want to know the voice of God, the message of God, you got to study it in the language of God. Okay?
Us Christians don't say God speaks Christian, no?
No, but Jews definitely say God speaks Hebrew. Everywhere in the Bible where God speaks, he's speaking in Hebrew, right? And even Jesus spoke Aramaic, which is a form of Hebrew. I don't know if we have any evidence he spoke Greek. Maybe he knew Greek, but I don't know if he spoke Greek. But, you know, the official, sort of the official language, certainly of the Old Testament, for the Jews, the Hebrew Bible is in Hebrew. And so some of them might say, and you know, I would even say, if you really want to know the Bible, you ought to be studying Hebrew and Greek. But I think they take it even a step further. Of course, the emphasis then comes down to the fact that the Quran is in Arabic. Muhammad spoke Arabic, the Arab people speak Arabic, and but I still think the term Islamic civilization is more comprehensive. Therefore, I think it's probably better to use that. Okay? Okay. What about some of the rules and or laws of Islam? This is certainly a part of Islamic civilization. The rules and laws, regulations we might call them, of Islam. Islam has many do's and don'ts. But, you know, to be honest, I think the Bible has a lot of do's and don'ts, right? Hebrew Bible, the New Testament, things that you shouldn't do, things that you should do, things that you ought to do, and things that you shouldn't do, right? Well, I mean, take the Ten Commandments. There's a list for you of things you shouldn't do. Definitely in the Old Testament. Pretty well enumerated, I think, for us. You shall not do this, you shall not do that, even though we often do. But that's another story. How do Muslims know what it is they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do? Obviously, they can read the Quran. But as we've mentioned in here before, it's more complicated than that in some ways. Now, I don't know how much you know about the study of Judaism. And I'm not just talking about the Hebrew Bible, I'm talking about Judaism. But Judaism builds up around it all kinds of interpretive things and volumes that are written. Okay? The Mishnah, for example, and other writings that are basically the rabbis going through and interpreting and expanding upon what's said in the Hebrew Bible. Okay? And there are schools of thought that go with that. It gets very complicated, and we're not going to go into it here. That's more what you want to think of when you think of what's going on here in Islam, that there is the Quran, but then laying alongside the Quran is the Hadith. And the Hadith records all the different conversations which have been verified, and they have a process where things get verified, to verify what Muhammad said. Somebody asked him advice. What about this, this, and this? And Muhammad says, this is what you ought to do. And so these then become added into this thing. Now, all this gets compilated into Sharia. Sharia, I think, is somewhat misunderstood in the West. I think people in the West think that there is a little book called Sharia, and that it has a list of laws in it, and that it's the same everywhere, and when the Muslims take over, that becomes the law book. That's a little distorted. It's not exactly like that. Sharia then takes what's in the Quran, and it takes what's in the Hadith, and then it takes what is the practice and interpretation, and that becomes the law of the land. As we said before, Islam and Islam, with Muhammad and so forth, this is not just a religion. This is a government. Maybe you call it an empire. And Muhammad was more than a religious ruler. He was a military ruler. He was a governmental leader, so on. So it's a little broader view. So much like the Talmud, and the Talmud is what is used to study Judaism. The Sharia law classifies different actions. It obligates people to do certain. In other words, you are obligated to do certain things. You are recommended to do certain things. You are forbidden to do certain things. Certain things are objectionable if you do them, and certain things are neutral. This is the way in which they categorize it. So think about that. It's not just you can do this and don't do that. It's at least these 5 categories. This is you must do. This is you must not do. But then here is something that, you're recommended to do this. You're not obligated to do this. This is, it's objectionable if you do it, but it's not forbidden. The word for forbidden in Arabic is haram. Haram. Forbidden.
Except they'll say in Arabic.
Haram, yeah, that's the Arabic. Haram. Haram! That is forbidden. Now, and then there are things that are neutral. Now, I think if you take a look at, I suppose, Christianity and Judaism, you might be able to think up how these 5 categories might apply. All right? There are some things in which we are told we should do, we must do. We must believe, we must have faith, we must do these things, we must confess. There are some things we were told we must not do, like the 10 Commandments. Do not do these things. There are other things that sort of fall in between those two. Are they forbidden? Are we obligated to do them? Or are they somewhere in between? How does Paul put it? All things are permissible, but not all things are profitable. What's Paul saying? He's saying that there are some things that, while not forbidden, we probably shouldn't do them. Right? There's not a, thus saith the Lord, you shan't do this. But Paul's saying, look, just because technically I can do this, it doesn't mean I should do this. And he spends quite a bit of time talking about that in Corinthians, and that's, by the way, in the Bible, so you might want to look at that sometime. But I think we can see this, right? And of course, these rules about Sharia, most of the time we hear, people getting their hands cut off, or women can't drive cars. Okay, that can be included, but it's not all that's there. It covers things like marriage laws, divorce, children, inheritance, hygiene, what things are clean and unclean, how you should clean yourself, and what kind of food you should eat. Worship, how should you worship and when should you worship, as well as commerce, how should you conduct business, and of course things that are criminal and what to do with criminals. Somebody trying to call me from Iowa. I don't know anybody in Iowa. So, for example, one of the laws of Islam is that you're not to charge someone interest. Yeah, that's all right, except there's no motivation to lend anybody money. You come up to me and say, hey, give me $100 and I'll pay you back someday. Meanwhile, I don't have the $100 to use until you decide you're going to pay me back, which maybe you won't, or maybe 20 years from now. Say, oh, by the way, here's your $100. So if you come up to me and ask me for a loan, say, hey, can I borrow $100? I'm not very inclined to want to do it because it only hurts me. Maybe it helps you, and so they've had to find creative ways around that. By the way, Christians also had that kind of restriction at some periods in Europe, and this is why Jews became the bankers who would loan them money, because they didn't have a prohibition of doing it for them. Well, I guess we're out of time once again.